You know what I'm saying? It's like, they
yeah.
don't say anything
No, they
about
said he
that.
majored in something else, didn't they?
Yeah, accounting.
Yeah, but they don't. Yeah.
I can only stay for a minute.
Yeah, I'm like,
My other movies.
Thanks for watching the screening. My name is Michael Lerman. I'm the artistic director here, and I'm lucky enough to have the director with us, Penny Lane.
Wow.
I guess I wanted to start with talking about, I've heard you talk a little bit about how the film talks a lot about how we view culture. And I want to know if that was the idea you started with, or did you start with Kenny as a subject, or where it came from for you?
Yeah, it definitely started with an idea, and the idea was this, like, the kind of exploration of conflicts in artistic taste and why those feel so, like, loaded and emotional and, like, real, even though we know that they're subjective and everyone knows that, but it doesn't matter because still we get really upset about other people's judgments in art, particularly music. I think there's something about music, because music is there's so many different places of music in our lives, like, that I think that we develop a much more, like, strong, intimate relationship with it than we do with really any other form of art. So anyway, so I started with that idea because I was asked to pitch a music documentary for this HBO series, The Music Box. And I thought of Kenny pretty much right away as, like, the perfect vessel for that idea. And in fact, the pitch that I gave them said this is not actually contingent upon Kenny's access to him or participation. Right. Because at first I was quite interested mostly in how people think about him and how people react to him. So that's how it started. But then we did bring the idea to him, and I met him and got to know him just a little bit. And the whole film really changed and became richer and broader because of his participation, I think. Right. So in the end, the film ends up containing a lot more kind of traditional biopic elements than I initially imagined. Right. But I actually found him very interesting, which I didn't know that I would do, So that's how it came about.
How did he react? Did you come to him with the idea and said, this is what I'm interested in making? Like,
yeah, totally. I absolutely did. And then, but now, these days, now that the film is done, he's he's always goofing off. So I don't even know if he's kidding or not. But now he's like, she didn't say anything to me about any of the, and I'm like, no, I definitely did. I definitely sat down with him in that first meeting and told him my overall approach and interest in the subject. Right. But then again, 2 years go by, and it's not like every conversation I have with him, he doesn't know what else I'm filming. So, right. From his point of view, perhaps it was quite a surprise to see in the end. But yeah, he did see it. He didn't have any creative control over it, but he did have the contractual right to view it before it was finished, just to give notes and particularly to demand that we correct any inaccuracies, which I wanted. So no problem with that. And so he did see it shortly before picture lock, and he says he loves it, so I don't know. I don't know if I believe him entirely, but he says he loves it. So
was there any friction there along the way at all? Was there any,
no.
It seemed very clean, and no. He comes off as so self-aware that seems like part of it too, of where he sits in the culture. So it's
so funny because you say he comes across self-aware, and other people say he's so not self-aware. And I think that's one of those paradoxes with Kenny. Is he self-aware or is he totally not self-aware? It's really unclear.
I mean, I think he understands the joke of himself in a way, but I think that also, the most telling scene is when you talk about privilege, and his race-based privilege, because he has to sit and kind of analyze it and go, I didn't think about it, but he does analyze it in a very kind of a lot of what he does it's almost more mathematical. It's more calculated than the average artist, and that goes along with that. So it's interesting.
Yeah, definitely. Anyway, but yeah, so yeah, he's I think an amazing character, and ultimately, after the first shoot day, right. He was so amazing on camera, honestly, that every minute was usable, and we had no bad footage with Kenny. And even after that first shoot, I thought, we could have approached this very differently. We could have just made a character-driven doc, just really focusing on him, and it would have been completely fascinating. So we were just lucky. We had a lot to work with.
Right, totally. Where do you think it kind of sits with the rest of your work? Because I think that a lot of your work is about perception and about kind of expectation versus reality. And so I'm curious where you think it sits in with, things like Hell, Satan, and Arnix, and that's,
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot about, well, first of all, it sounds kind of cheap, but I don't think it's cheap. Like, I really do try to think of ideas where the very idea of the film is surprising.
Right.
That just appeals to me, So if you read something that's like top front page news this week in the New Yorker, it's very unlikely that I'm going to chase that story because I sort of feel like, well, everyone already knows, So for me, I am always trying to find like very unexpected angles on things. So if that's about like religious liberty in America through Satanism, or the idea of music as it ties to our personal and social identity through Kenny G, and I'm also always looking for humor because it's just a core value of mine. Like I want to have fun when I make films, and I want my audience to have fun when they're watching. And it's because like for me, that fun and that entertainment value and that humor is got to be equal to the kind of provocation and the challenge, so asking audiences to challenge their preconceptions is like a pretty core value. But I want to do that with like a smile on my face because I'm not trying to like be aggressive and like make people angry. I'm actually trying to like sort of please and delight and entertain them. But while I'm doing that, I'd like for you to like re-examine some of your like maybe core beliefs along the way. So I think
it's like a nice subversive place to be too. It's a nice way for it to sit,
Yeah, I think so. Thank you.
Do you think were there backup ideas you had if HBO was like, we can't make this movie about Kenny, but I have other musicians in mind that fit that?
Basically not, no. And I'm now trying to come up with an idea for season 2 of this series, and I'm like, all right, I don't know, I might have only had like one music documentary idea. I mean, I'm sure I'll come up with something, but it's just like it's like for me, like like the topic of my film is like insert name of band. It's just like I don't even know like what to do with that. I don't even know how anyone feels inspired by that prompt.
Right.
And because either you love that music, and then you're like, what, trying to make a film that's like good enough for them, and it's like that seems very intimidating because I'm not cool, or you don't, and then what are you doing, So yeah, it's a pretty tough form, I think, and even though I tried really hard to avoid all the pitfalls of the genre or of the form, like the film still has some of them in there, there's almost no getting around it. There's a certain amount of, biopicking you have to do, and there's a certain amount of fan service you have to do. Like you do have to play the hits, like that's, you don't, I guess you don't have to, but there's a sense that you like really like kind of have to do certain things. And it's as much as I struggled against it, it's still really hard. It's hard to get out of it entirely.
It's kind of hard to talk about something without talking about the biggest part of it in a way, like
exactly. Yeah.
Universe, so
yeah.
I'm also curious, kind of when you talk about form, obviously we're in a world, we're in a shifting world of distribution forms, and this film was made for HBO, but you're having a moment where you're able to bring it to home, we're able to see it on the screen. Do you feel like there's a difference in your work depending on where it's going to land, like knowing you're going to make something for HBO?
I've never felt that way. I mean, I think I just didn't start out my career, and this is true for a lot of documentary filmmakers. I mean, documentary has traditionally had more of a home on TV. Right. So I've never been like extremely attached to like the cinema as the venue for my films. I am like all our filmmakers. That is my favorite venue for my films. But I don't make films that I feel lose a lot when you watch them on TV or even on like your laptop. Of
right.
course I think they're better in a theater, but it doesn't faze me at all.
Are there things you're working on now that outside of season 2?
Yeah, well, right now I'm in post-production on a film called Confessions of a Good Samaritan, which is about my experience donating one of my kidneys to a stranger. So it's a very personal film. It's very different. So.
Do you feel like it's equally as humorous?
No. I'm trying, but no.
Did you get feedback from kind of the other primary subjects in it, like the music critics and things, after you showed it to them?
No. I mean, you mean like feedback as in when it was done? Had they seen it?
Yeah, just curious on reactions from because you were talking about, it's a movie in which it spends so much time on Kenny G, but also spends so much time with these people talking about how they hate Kenny G. So it's really interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, they've all seen it. All 5 of my critics have seen it. I wanted them to see it before they saw it with an audience in New York City in a couple weeks, so I sent them a link. And it's been great. It's been really nice having follow-up conversations with them. I mean, every one of them was so amazing. This film could have been so long because there was just so much more that they said and brought to it that was valuable and meaningful. A couple of them, and none of them know anything about Kenny. So for them, watching it was like quite revelatory because they didn't come to it with any knowledge of like his personality or what he's like. So they were really just commenting on the music and the music's place in our culture, like I was at the beginning as well. So I think they've been really interested to see how their theories and ideas about what is in that music and what is not in that music, how those map onto the artist who is making the music. You know what I mean? Like you really do. I mean, I found talking to him so fascinating. I could have spent infinite hours in the recording studio with him, just listening to him talk about how he thinks about art. And it's just that kind of absolute like lack of ideas there is actually shocking in a way, but like it's kind of, and you kind of don't believe it. So you keep going like different angles, like, what about this angle, that angle? And you're like, no, it's just about like what is beautiful, what feels beautiful and pleasing, and what feels like technically correct. And by the way, like that's what most people want from most art most of the time, including us, like the sophisticated, film society people. It's sort of like it's sort of easy to forget because I live in this kind of like art bubble with like other creatives and like, but I used to teach art to undergraduates, and that's really where the seeds of this project started, because I was teaching at a school called Colgate, and the students who came to that school were not like particularly like sort of steeped in like art stuff. So they would come to the art classes that I was teaching with like, ideas about art that I thought of as being like had died like 150 years ago or something, Okay, well, what is art for? Well, it's to feel good. It's to relax. It's like to be beautiful, and that's how I know it's good, is if it looks good and is technically skilled. It's like hard to do and you did it well, and it's beautiful and it makes you kind of feel good. And then they'd be like, why do you show us all this weird art? I'm like, what is this normal art you're thinking about? I don't even know. But so a combination of sort of like remembering that I have lived most of my life in this bubble where there's certain ideas and expectations about art, but like most people still think like my kid could paint that about most modern art, was one part of it. And the other part of it was the inevitable conversation that we had to have about how there are no objective criteria by which we can actually judge art in any objective manner. And I will be grading you. Like really like those two kind of, interests of mine were what was fueling my thinking behind the film.
It's interesting.
So Kenny's totally normal is what I'm saying. Kenny's like ideas and attitudes about art are actually just standard.
Right. But it's funny because you talk about the bubble, but then you also talk about the key element of comedy in your work, and that's almost the same. In a way, it's the same thing, right? It's like saying it has to be entertaining on top of
yeah.
And
But that's just about me though. Like when I went to art school, I kind of got the very strong impression that quality was inversely related to popularity, and I just didn't like that idea and felt very rebellious. And so my entire career has been built on like proving these people wrong, like this like total like straw man argument that no one ever really made. But in my mind, I'm like still in art school rebelling against that idea, because I don't think that people are stupid, and I don't think that you have to make art that's punishing in order to ensure that people notice it's important or something. I don't buy that at all.
Rebellion against the rebellion. It's
exactly.
Against the rebellion.
Yeah, and I also just just like have a very like deep vein of like, you know, sort of skepticism about snobbery and like, you know, sort of, you know, kind of constantly like constant vigilance against snobbery. And it's super hard. It's really hard to do when you do feel like you know more than other people.
I gotta ask, and this is kind of a loaded question. If you don't have an answer, I understand. But do you see a film equivalent of Kenny? Do you see a film equivalent in
It's a
your
great
head?
question. I was asking around about this, and I actually noticed during the Toronto premiere, some of the film critics were asking as well, and no one seems to have settled on a particular answer. I certainly haven't. I don't really know like who the Kenny G of filmmaking is. Do you have any thoughts about that?
I mean, I have thoughts on films. I don't know if I have thoughts on people. Like, you know, I've heard like Shawshank Redemption called the cargo shorts of movies, where it's this thing where it's like it's comfortable and
Right. And who
it's
directed
utilitarian
that?
and you know what?
Who directed that?
Frank Darabont, I believe.
Oh, I don't even know who that is. Maybe he's the Kenny G of film.
Yeah, maybe it's like Michael Bay or something, you know?
Well, I maybe would have said Michael Bay, maybe, right? Because there's such a kind of like emptiness there, but like
Right.
just a point of like kind of popcorn value.
Right.
But I don't think any of them are trying to it's just a different form because there is a usefulness to cinema or television, you know, like moving image stuff. But it's just never the same as music. You don't get married to a movie. You don't like play a movie in your car. You don't play a movie while you're giving birth. Like you don't play a movie to send people out of the mall when it's time to go home. Like
Right.
music has like an almost infinite amount of use cases and contexts where we encounter it. And
Right.
I think that's what makes it so special. And Kenny's genius was sort of I don't think it was intentional, but Kenny's genius is that his thing that he wanted to make and continues to want to make is very useful in like a lot of categories. It's useful for relaxing. I saw someone last night at a screening here in Montclair where she said, "This is my nap music." And I was like, yeah, it's great nap music. You know, it's good for putting
Right.
the baby to sleep. Like it's good for putting you to sleep. It's good for, you know, a lot of people I talk to say it's good for meditating or studying. And so, you know, it's good for sex apparently. So
Yeah, like he says something to make the babies and something to put them to sleep by.
that's right. Yeah. So there's something that was really another interesting thing. Like someone calls it like musical furniture, and like that is a good phrase because it sort of just is there. It's like there to be part. It's to sort of seamlessly integrate into our world.
Right.
That said, I'm not sure in like the 2020s, like the era that we're in, that we have the same need for like music for the masses. Like we just don't have the same type of mass culture. So like it's hard to remember this, but it used to be that when you were standing in line at the bank, we didn't all have like our own
Right.
options.
Right.
Like it really
Right.
was the case that someone else had to choose what you were hearing when you were standing in line at the bank, or like whatever else, fill in the blank, all of those things, including like the radio, which is also kind of more or less dead now.
And commercials and all those things too, which people,
Yeah.
you know, now with DVR and we have streaming where they're not always there, and you know.
Yeah,
it's
you're not forced to hear things that you don't want to hear the way that you used to be. So
Right.
that was another thing I was interested in exploring because there was something about Kenny coming along just at the moment that this kind of like mass culture was, you know, I remember being a teenager in that era and we were all afraid that like the future was going to be just like one monoculture. Like all signs pointed toward that. No signs pointed toward what we actually have now, which is that every single person has their own individual feed for their whole lives that is
Right.
like tailored for them. Like that is not what we thought was coming in the 90s. We thought the future was just Kenny G and McDonald's and like that was going to be it for everybody. Yeah, so we were wrong. But also like there was this kind of consolidation moment that it just felt like that's what everything was going in that direction. And so his music made sense at that time.
it's the movie in a way is a capsule time too.
Yeah, I think probably in my original pitch, I used the phrase like the death of mass culture.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think we have to wrap up, but I really appreciate you doing this for us, and I'm excited that everyone came to the screening.
Yeah, thanks for being here.